Graduate School of Education here. We're absolutely delighted to host this event this evening to say thank you to the teachers from Shanghai. We're really delighted to welcome our colleagues and teachers from around the region, primary teachers, secondary teachers, colleagues from UWE, colleagues from Spa, and possibly colleagues from Bath as well. So we're all here because we're all interested in teaching and learning maths. And maths education is one of my main areas of research. I was until quite recently the head of the Graduate School of Education, but Justin Dillon, who is sitting there, is now the new head. And his research area is science education, so we've got quite a lot in common. So just to say, we've got a long tradition of research in maths education and professional development of teachers here at the Graduate School of Education. And together with my colleague Alf Coles, who's sitting there, and Lorinda Brown, we're particularly fascinated by the similarities and differences in approaches to teaching mathematics that we know exist around the world. We're also particularly concerned about raising attainment in mathematics, so we are interested to hear more about what's been happening locally with the Shanghai visiting teachers. So we become aware of these differences, not only from our own research, but also from our international group of home students and also international students who are doing their doctorate and master's level courses here. So we have people who come from countries all around the world, including China, Hong Kong, Mexico, Brazil, Chile, and so on. And through that work, we develop a community in which one of our interests is how people approach the teaching of maths in their own country. So also, we often have international visitors who come to Bristol to find out more about how we teach maths. And currently we do have a visitor called Helen. I don't know where she is. Is she here? She's sitting next to Alf, who has actually come from China, and she's come from Jiangsu University. I'm sure I pronounced that incorrectly, but that's just north of Shanghai. So it might be interesting for you to talk together later. So to say again, we're really pleased to welcome the teachers, Jean and Sherry, who've been with us for 3 weeks and are now coming to the end of their visit. I don't know whether you've managed to see much of Bristol, but you may see a little bit, the suspension bridge, in the presentations in a few minutes. The formal part of the evening is going to last about an hour, and we're going to hear from a range of people who've been engaging with the work of the Shanghai teachers. We hope very much that you'll all stay for drinks afterwards that have been laid out, drinks and snacks, so we hope that you will stay for that. And there is going to be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of these brief presentations. So welcome again, and I'm just going to hand over now to Mike Eatwell, who is the principal of Fishponds Academy, and he's going to introduce the speakers for the evening.
Good evening, thank you very much for coming this evening. I'm just going to introduce each person who's going to be speaking this afternoon. And just to mention, the reason why I've got the suspension bridge on there is because I'm not sure whether Sherry and Jean have actually seen the suspension bridge, but they have seen a lot of shots. That might be the only image they get of it before they head on back to Shanghai. So the people that are going to speak this evening, first of all, if you could stand up, we've got Jane Orlington and Sal Edwards. Sal is from Bedbrook Primary Academy and Jane is from Fishponds Academy, and they've been working alongside Sherry and Jean for the past 2.5 weeks, teaching lessons together. So they're going to share their perspectives in a moment. Sit down a second. Just so we can see you all, we've got Sherry, would you like to stand up?
Yeah.
And we've got Jean, who's been working at Fishponds Academy for the past 2.5 weeks. Thank you very much. We'll hear from you shortly. And Mandy Nilsson, who's the Executive Primary Principal of the Cabinet Learning Federation. Sal and Mandy and I visited Shanghai earlier in the year, so we're also going to share some of our perspective as well throughout this evening. And then, as Ross said, there's going to be a short question and answer, hopefully with a translator too, so they'll be able to understand and we can get some really deep questions through. Okay, so we're going to start off this evening with Sal and with Jane, and they're going to talk about the class teacher's perspective and the impact on learning.
So I'm Sal Edwards, as Mike said. I'm a Year 5 teacher and maths lead director at Bedford Academy. As you all know, back in September, a group of 72 maths leads and head teachers were sent out to Shanghai to see if we could uncover the successes in maths that they have out there. So Mike, Mandy and myself, we went to two different schools in Shanghai. Mandy and I went to Sherry's school, Penglai, number 2 primary school. And we observed Sherry teaching there and some of her colleagues as well, mainly obviously focusing on maths. I should start saying it was an absolute privilege going out there, and being part of this whole project has been a privilege as well. So when we were observing the lessons out there, it was very obvious, very apparent the differences between UK schools and Shanghai schools. We were told before about the differences we all know, the fact that the teachers are subject specialists, they have their extra planning time, and the cultural differences of parents being supportive and very key in their learning. So we knew we had to look beyond that. So we were looking very much at all the key factors that made a difference with their teaching and that we could steal and use within our teaching. We came back, we were really excited by what we saw, and very keen to try all these things and try and sell all these aspects to my colleagues. The first thing that I brought back, the easiest thing to implement, was this whole idea of asking why again, and encouraging the children to answer in full questions. The Chinese have this problem that the answer is only the beginning, so we very much went in trying to implement that because it was the easiest thing for us to do straight away. We then tried to think about how we could alter the structure of our maths lessons as well. Those of you who have observed Sherry this week will have seen the chunks, the teach bit, do a bit, so we were trying that at Bedbrook as well. That short, sharp chunks of teaching to see if that would help the children's understanding. We were also thinking about how we could use misconceptions as a starting point in our planning so that they didn't come up later in the lessons themselves. And also that the lessons had a single focus, so that we could spend time on the basics and not move on too quickly. And actually the differences between the textbooks really highlighted that whole idea of stripping back to the basics as well. And in China they have this unbelievable belief that they can do, so we're really trying to instill that in our children as well, rather than I'm not very good at maths, so we're trying to change that attitude of the children. That's what we've been doing since I've come back from Shanghai. Also, since between October and February, we've arranged some collaborative planning opportunities in year teams across a group of primary schools. In Shanghai, we realised very quickly that learning from each other was absolutely key in professionally developing, so we were trying to mimic that as well. And the fact that in Shanghai, observations of common practice over there is something that happens all the time, so we're trying to kind of have this more open door policy there. And then the final thing that we try to introduce is the TRGs, the teacher research groups that they have in Shanghai. Working initially with our MQTs and our school direct students, and our first focus has been about the immediacy of feedback, which again is another key idea that comes across in the Shanghai teachers. All of these aspects of this Shanghai approach has been very much welcomed by Bedford staff, the two over there, and by the children as well. As I said, I came back in October full of all these ideas to try out, and they've been really taken on board. And that brings us to just over 2 weeks ago, when our visitors hit Bristol, ready for us to learn even more. And over to Jane.
Well, so obviously the second part of the project was Jean and Sherry coming over from Shanghai, and as we were delighted to host them, and I view it as really an opportunity of a career, and it's been absolutely excellent. The way we've structured it, the way we've run the programme, is that the teachers were in school for 3 days, where they were just getting to meet the classes and familiarise themselves with their setting and so on. and then it was straight into 2 weeks of full-on teaching. And in the second week, as many of you will have seen, and because I can recognise faces, came to actually observe Jean and Sherry. So hats off to them, because they had 10 plus, I think it was 15 in my class on one day, observing them. So the children did brilliantly, and they did brilliantly. The structure of the day, and I think Bedbrook did the same, was the teachers taught one lesson in one class, then they taught the second lesson in a second class, and then we would have catch-up sessions in the afternoon, because we wanted to make sure it was as authentic as it could be as a Chinese experience, and that's exactly what they do. They would mark the work, do a catch-up session in the afternoon with those children they felt they needed. So we did that as well, and then we prepared lessons the rest of the afternoon. And I must say the catch-up sessions were brilliant. The children loved going out to them. They thought it was a treat that they were going out with me and Jean and having more input, and they could understand it more. And they were then prepared, ready for the next day. So the catch-up sessions really worked. What were the key elements that I noticed that were different from some of the practice that we see in England? There's 4 key elements that I picked out. The first thing was Jean had an absolute bank, a wealth of images that would help with her teaching. So she taught fractions in years 2 and 3, and Sherry taught fractions in year 4 and 5. And the images that they could bring, that they could show the children, you know, the concepts they wanted to get across were excellent. So that was a real clear bank of images. That was the key thing. The other thing that Sal's mentioned is the chunking of the lesson. Teach a bit, do a bit, teach a bit more, go off and do a bit more, think a bit, challenge a bit. And that was really helped the children, breaking things down into small chunks so they didn't have to keep too much in their memory. And actually we started doing that a little bit before they came to help prepare the children. And I asked my children to compare that style lesson to an average English one where you teach, model, and then they go off and do it for 20 minutes. And they'd already told me they preferred that. They said they could keep smaller bits in their head, they could understand it more, then they could go and do it, and it was all fresh in their memory. So, you know, I know that is definitely what the children prefer and works well. The other thing was the reasoning and challenge weaved throughout the lesson. And Jean always put up slides that just said true or false, and there'd be a couple of examples the children would have to discuss, or think and conclude, look and classify, look and judge. So just those 2 words put up on the screen with examples, questions, so on, that the children then had to discuss. So just 2 words that would get them really thinking and reflecting. So that was very, very good. And then each time when they went back to the tables, they'd do a few exercises which were really carefully chosen, examples or bits of work they had to do that didn't always mirror exactly what she'd done. So it was a game that could just get them to think a little bit more and think about what she'd said and then apply it in a slightly different way. The impact on the children's learning has been immense. They've enjoyed the sessions. They've made excellent progress. Just a little sort of anecdote. One of the parents' evening last week, and a boy in my class, he hadn't finished one of the exercises. So I said, "Oh, I'm sure you can do this, Caleb. Come and do it, with your mum there." And he just did it, and it was comparing fractions with a different denominator. And this is a year 2 child. And I said, "Oh, it's really good. He got it all right. Tell me why. How did you do that?" And he absolutely explained that obviously the smaller the denominator, the bigger the pieces are going to be, and the larger the denominator, the smaller the pieces are going to be. So thank you, Jean. That just shows the progress that they were able to make. And obviously that process I've said of teach a bit, do a bit, review as well. Jean would always review at the beginning of the lesson. So review, teach a bit more, practice a bit more, and so on. That element really helped the children embed their learning. And yeah, the nugget that I've taken from it is that I can only speak for myself, probably spoon feed my children too much. And I've got to learn to step back and make them do a bit more thinking. And then Sal's going to finish.
So having this opportunity to observe Sherry and sort of Jane with Jean, over these last 2 weeks I've learned such a lot from it, and hopefully lots of you in here and lots of teachers across Bristol have been able to learn from as well, all those observers coming to see her. It's confirmed lots of the ideas that we've been trialling since coming back from Shanghai, and it's also highlighted things that we need to tweak to make better, and things that we need to take further. And lots of those ideas were picked up in the discussions that we had in the afternoon of the last 2 weeks as well. I mean, it's always really powerful as well, seeing things for yourself rather than hearing them second hand. So for my colleagues at Bedbrook and for all the teachers who did come in to observe it means such a lot more being able to see that. It's going to talk about some of the areas that I've learnt having had the benefit of having Sherry in school the last 2 weeks. Starting with that need to have absolutely secure subject knowledge. As primary teachers, we are obviously generalists, so we might not have that wealth of knowledge that Sherry and Jean have as subject specialists. So that's something that we know we will need to work on to develop. And also, just watching Sherry teach really clarified the need to get those steps that Jane herself talked about in those chunks just right. They're at an exact size that means that the children can really develop that understanding, that really clear understanding. And in Shanghai, that is as a result lots of careful planning by these subject specialists. And again, that's something that we know we're going to have to work on, so those steps are just the right size to enable that thinking process. Personally, I've realised that my chunks need to be even smaller. The pieces of independent work that children were doing was I've realised too big at times. That's something that I think we can take from it as well. And Sherry at times was giving the children just 3 questions to complete their independent work, and the expectation was there that they had to complete it really quickly, and the children all rose to that challenge very effectively. I realised that I need to say why a lot more as well. As I mentioned before, that Sherry's literally saying it all the time, and the children get used to it. They start anticipating that they're going to be asked why, so they need to start thinking about the explanation to their answer. I loved we've been focusing on fractions, and Sherry showed the fraction 2/7, and she asked the children, what does the 2 mean? What does the 7 mean? Beyond numerator and denominator, she wants to get to the bottom of exactly what that was all about. So I've realised that I need to do that more, and that's what as a school we need to do more, and as teachers that we need to get that into our teaching and learning as well. The other thing that I've taken from across these last 2 weeks is that need for real precision in the language that we use and in the resources that we use as well. I was talking to Debbie Morgan and Claire Chrissy this morning about how initially we thought that precise language was coming because English isn't Sherry's first language, but actually it is. She uses that precise language because she doesn't want to distract from the maths. And in the same way, all the resources that she used were again very, very precise. Nothing that will detract from the maths, and that use of the images that Jane talked about as well. That's all there to support the maths and not distract from it. We've realised as well that differentiation is going to look different. Those of you that observed Sherry and Jean will have seen that differentiation well, they were just given one worksheet, so we're thinking about how that will look at Bedbrook and beyond as well. So the children have been so excited to have Sherry as part of our school, and they've learned a lot from it. They can see that it will help their understanding, and when I asked them on the first day of teaching what they could see that I've been talking about, they could identify the fact that she says why not. They could identify those images that are so clear, and they could identify the fact that they were teaching in small chunks. So the children are really aware of the impact of this whole project. As I said before, it has been an absolute privilege to be part of this project, and we've got an exciting few months, years ahead of us, and hopefully lots of brilliant maths teaching and learning as well. But thank you again, both of you.
Thank you two for such a brilliant discussion about what you've learnt as well from Jean and Sherry. And we're actually going to pass over to Sherry and to Jean just to say a couple of words now. So if you'd like to come to the front. You're a bit nervous. But this is Sherry.
Ladies and gentlemen, I need to read it. Thank you. Okay. First of all, I would like to thank Mandy and my head teacher here, Duncan. They went through a lot of trouble to make me feel at home. Yeah, and Sally, my partner here, who made the teaching so much easier for me. And thanks to all the staff at Beckbrook, and thanks translator Sonia. Oh, thank you. Okay, this was my first time to teach maths in English. Use Shanghai textbook, Shanghai style, but teach maths in English. Oh my God. I have tried my best to make the children understand why and how. And I hope I have achieved it. Today, I taught revision as my last lessons. Children's response, should they have absorbed what I taught them in the past 2 weeks. So I feel relieved. I have left with such a memorable experience. So I will never forget and will cherish forever. Thank you very much.
This project means a lot to me. I have learned so much from this experience, from the teachers and the children. I would like to thank to all of you for this opportunity. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. That would be a bit daunting if I had to do that in Mandarin. I've done extremely well. So Mandy and I are just going to talk about what it's been like from a head's perspective, and maybe what some of the people who visited over the last week have said, and what the impact and what the types of things that we're doing as a cluster of schools in East Bristol at the moment that might give you a head start about where you could go if back in your own schools. You're going to start.
Okay, so as executive principal for the primaries,
sorry, I did a different Bristol picture.
No, it's completely thrown you now. Okay, I think one of the things I would want to say is this is actually only the beginning. I think I said that when I came back in October, having spent over a week with Sherry. We learned so much then. We sort of said, well, that's the beginning, and well, we don't really understand mastery and the method because we've only seen a few lessons. And actually having, across the Federation, done quite a lot of work with Claire Christie and with a couple of the principals who've really taken on maths and maths mastery in their schools. You think, yeah, we're getting there, and then no, we're not, because we've gone to see Sherry and Jean again, and we realise that there's even more to learn. So the fact that Sherry and Jean are going isn't the end, it's kind of the beginning again. And one of the things that we really do need to keep hold of is what we've learned over this last period of time. And I think one of the things as a federation we need to do, which we discussed very briefly this this morning, is getting this whole project written up so that we can see what everybody has learned and really understand the journey that the individual academies and the Federation itself has kind of gone on, and the journey it will continue to go on. Sal alluded to the fact that we've been spending time as a federation within the primaries of meeting once a term to start planning collaboratively across our year groups, so that we really begin to understand what this model of teaching looks like. What does mastery look like at year 1, at year 2, at year 3 and onwards? And also that we want to continue that again. And one of the things you also mentioned briefly today as well was that actually, although it's been the year of maths this year, I think we need another year of maths next year, so that we can keep this learning fresh, keep it going, keep the collaboration across the primaries going, because I think people have learned a huge amount from just sitting down in their year groups, talking and planning together. We need to pick up what Sal also said about subject knowledge. We're not there yet. We keep talking about we've got to go deeper. A lot of teachers don't know what deeper looks like. So that's another ongoing journey that we as principals as a federation will pick up on. The other thing is in July, there's going to be a big focus with our conference, the CLF conference, on maths, and you can pull some of that learning together, have Debbie Morgan there, people like that, keynote speakers, who again can help us to embed our understanding of this style of teaching. So for us, it's just the beginning. I think it would be great to be here again this time next year, just to see how far we've moved on, and to see the progress, hopefully, that the children are making with this very specific style of teaching, which is taking people out of their comfort zone. But actually, that's not a bad place to be. So watch this space.
Thanks, Mandy. I'm just going to go through a few photographs. I'm sure you can see them very well. Of just some of the lessons that Jean has been teaching this week. She hasn't seen these photographs yet. I've been tweeting and taking pictures, and I think those were the only resources that Jean used in a week and a half, and maybe some little pie pieces. That's right, isn't it? So I'm just going to feedback on some of the comments that teachers made and other people made when they came to see me over last week. As Sal said, we had probably 130 people that came and watched us across the two schools, and I know many of those people are in this room today. So one of the things people were talking about was the skill that Jean had giving instant feedback and marking. So rather than spending 2 hours of an evening marking books, she would spend 5 minutes within a lesson, because she gave the children 3 carefully thought through examples. She would mark them all, give them a star, move around the tables, and then that was done. So she had her assessment in her head of what children could and couldn't do straight away. She had the responses that the children gave in a lesson, and as James said, they then spent some time, maybe 10-15 minutes, for the children that didn't fully understand doing a catch-up session in the afternoon. So that's a really different shift. So the emphasis was really on spending that time, that quality time, in the afternoon and the evening, planning for the next day. It wasn't about referring to what they'd done, it was about what's coming up next in light of her assessments. The assumption is that after the catch-up sessions, of course, all children have understood and are at the same level every day, which, as Mandy said, is very, very difficult to get your head around when you have a massive gap. For example, it's not uncommon in Year 6, as we were saying today, not sure who that was, I've been speaking to lots of people, in a Year 6 class, for there to be level 1 to level 6. It's not uncommon. And the idea of mastery is that we close that gap, we narrow that gap, and by the time the children get to Year 6, there is no gap. It's going to take some time, I think, before we get there and get it right. So how do we do that, this idea of keeping the class together whilst stretching higher attainers that really do need to be pushed and thought about within our current structure? And a lot of teachers have said, right, okay, I watched a 45-minute lesson today, and actually probably without the language barrier, we could probably get that into about 35 minutes, maybe 40 at a push. My lesson's an hour long, so the 20 minutes that I've got left, I could do practice for some children that needed to consolidate. I could do extension and going deeper with those children that needed to be stretched, and I could do the catch-up and so on with the other children that needed some extra. So you could structure your lessons within your current hour and put those elements in. Worth thinking about. I know there were some great ideas about how that could be done this week. Again, as Mandy says, we need to understand what going deeper means. We now have age-related expectations for each year group, and when children are able to do those things, got that mastery, they don't look at the year above, they go deeper. We do need to get to grips with what that means. Is it problem solving? Is it reasoning? What does that look like? You know, we all think we know, or we think we know, but do we all think the same thing? Do we approach it in the same way? I don't think so yet. So that's certainly a step for me in our school to understand what that means and how we approach it with a wide variety of children. Some people said, so what about teaching assistants? They don't have teaching assistants in the same way over there. Well, this is year 2, by the way, after 5 lessons of fractions for Jean. It's quite advanced, I think. It's your class, isn't it? Pretty good. Yeah, what about teaching assistants? At the moment, we do lots and lots of interventions and catch-ups, and you know, in maths particularly, we do first class at number, we do numbers count, we do success at arithmetic, we do X, Y, and Z, and all these other things. But you know, surely if those children are keeping together and we're doing those mini catch-up sessions, what's the role of the teaching assistant? How does that impact on your school? Should we be asking them to do some pre-teaching, so children who you think may not get it are getting a head start when they come into those lessons? Certainly worth thinking about. Jane came up with a great thing, you know, and we've all noticed it. Jean gave a lot of space in her lessons. The pace of learning wasn't about how fast you talk and how many activities you can squeeze in. It's about how much space and how much time you give the children to think. Sometimes there was up to a minute before children answered a question. She gave them that time, and she didn't butt in, she didn't prompt, she didn't give them the answers. I'm one of those people that finds it a little bit uneasy to have that silence, and Jane, you said that you were as well. So just giving children that space to think and respond would be brilliant. Easy one, I think. For EAL learners, the structure of these lessons, Sal went through, is very, very clear. There are a lot of repetition in the lesson. So she would ask a child to say a phrase, a different child to say a phrase, another child to say the same phrase, repeat the same phrase, and then we all say the same phrase. So that happens lots and lots and lots of times during the lesson. So children are able to recite the key messages from the lesson at the end. And we were having a conversation this week about whether children are just able to repeat those or whether they've got that deep conceptual understanding of what they're saying. And actually, as Jane and I'm sure Sal has found out this week, children are able to use that knowledge and able to talk about the maths and are able to apply it to other situations. So it might be repetition and paraphrasing, but it does work a lot of it. Key messages going in deeply. In year 2, doing well this week. We had a discussion today about how single-minded they are, the 2 teachers here and in Shanghai, about their objective for that day. You know, Ofsted have long said to us about making well-judged choices through a lesson. So if a child comes up with an idea or a conjecture, maybe we respond to that quickly. But Jean had a single focus through her lesson. And sometimes she would shut down the child and say, actually, we're not doing that today, let's do that another time. So, single-minded, this is the outcome of the lesson, this is what I want all children to learn, and this is how we're going to do it today. So keeping that single focus in mind. Something that we've trialled amongst our cluster is to do topics much longer. You know, rather than spending 3 days moving on to the next thing, 3 days, 4 days, maybe a week at the most, before moving on. We spent a whole term on place value, whole term on addition, and it has really, really made a difference. Really made a difference. So children aren't moving on to the year above or to the next up until they've got those concepts embedded and they've got them right. So many year 6 teachers say, oh, we can't do long division because they can't do the subtraction, or they haven't got their number bonds, or they haven't got their tables. So if we get those building blocks in place to start with and spend the time doing it, then it's an investment worth making for later on. So spending that time, longer, slower topics. Jane mentioned about weaving the topics through the structure. I would say that when Jean was teaching, she would go forward 2 steps, back 1. She would go forward 2 steps, back 1. She was constantly reflecting on what she'd done already, maybe in a different concept, and then moving on. back, and then forward. And if you've seen them, you know what I meant. One thing that would be great for us as teachers is not to have to pluck your objectives out of the air, and I think maybe that's a bit of work we need to do as a country. They have all their PowerPoints, they have all their worksheets, they have all their textbooks, they have all their practice books ready, and then they adjust them in light of what the children can and can't do that day. So they have that detailed structure to enable them to guide all children across the city, 24 million in that city, with the same sort of math. So again, if we had that structure, rather than having to Google or go to primary resources or go to these other places, so we've got that subject knowledge embedded, that would really help us. So maybe that's somewhere, particularly with the textbook trial that's going on at the moment, things are heading, and I think that would be a big bonus. And the last bit that we should really discuss is exactly what Sal was saying. There is not a culture of I can't do maths in China. Every child can succeed, which is the mastery model. You know, we can do it and we will do it, except some children may take a bit longer to get there. And I've used this analogy a number of times about driving tests. You know, some people take a lot of lessons to take their driving test and pass, and other children, other adults only take 1 or 2 lessons to pass their driving test. So, you know, think about those children, just take a bit longer. They will get there, but maybe we need to do things in a different way. And certainly what we've seen from Sherry and Jean over the last few weeks has been doing things in a different way. So I'm going to leave it there and pass on to me. We're going to have a few questions and answers now. So can I pull maybe Sal and Jane and Sherry and Jean, and maybe translators to come out the front. So if you have any questions for anybody, would you like to raise your hand? Forget to come out the front. Maybe Mandy, would you like to share this? Yes.
My question was about you said about the 40 minutes and 20 minutes at the end. I mean, I kind of find it hard to imagine being pulled in 3 directions at that point. So how do you manage that the last 20 minutes?
Well,
and what are you having them do? Are some of them doing worksheets or?
Yeah, so it would be consolidation. This is just an idea. We haven't actually started those yet. We're thinking about how we possibly could structure a lesson. So after you've done your 40 minutes, the 20 minutes would be practice, independent practice, based on some simple tasks that we've done in the lesson, so they might need a bit more. One of them might be catch-up, so that would be working with the teacher, and the other one is go deeper, so it might be an investigation that they can work on independently. So it'll be 2 groups working independently, one with the teacher. It's probably what you do anyway, actually. Any other questions?
How do you deal with having, because I've got a level 1 and I've got someone working at level 6, how do you do that? Because with the traditional lesson that we taught previously, I can do that and I can have my top and bottom and off we go. But the thought of some of the things that I do, trying to apply it to that model, it just kind of like, oh.
It is a bit mind-blowing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm just wondering how, you know, if you had to do that, where would you start?
Can I answer to start with?
Carry on.
And just say what I've seen this week? I think the answer is aim there and expect them all to get there, and then they will get there. This is what I've seen this week. You know, watching Year 2 do really complex fractions. These are all Year 2 lessons. Really complex fractions. They've all achieved it in those classes. All achieved it. If you teach Year 5 and 6, you have got that gap already. So you might need to plug some gaps. And I know Claire's put together a document about some of the pre-knowledge for each of the topics. So that might help you in enabling some of those gaps to be filled. Particularly in the next year or next 2 years, while the gap is still very wide.
I know I've tried to do some things from the network meetings that we're part of, and it's kind of you start right at the bottom and you build up and up and up, and I'm just very conscious that I'm more able, I start going, yeah, well, I know this bit, and I know this bit, that they're not having themselves pushed at the moment. That's my...
We've talked a lot in the afternoon discussion groups about how that pushing to explain answers naturally extends as well. We were talking about how lots of the children who get it quickly wouldn't be able to explain before now, wouldn't be able to explain how they got their answer. So what I found over the last couple of weeks is those children are now anticipating I would be asked to explain how I got my answer now. So they are extending themselves in that way. I do think that this is where we've got a crossover of the things that work well in Shanghai, and we know we need to bring elements. Yeah. So you take the bits that work well and combine them with the bits that we know work well with us as well.
And when you have such long topics, so say 4 weeks to do your edition, you can do all those plugging the gaps and then put in the other sections as well. So you do have the freedom and the time to do that if you change around your curriculum coverage a bit. The other thing that Jean was saying is that by the end of the lesson she wants all children to be here, but some children will do an extra challenge. So at the end of each lesson she would pop in a couple of extra questions on each section, wouldn't she? To really stretch those high retainers and push them a bit more. So you're kind of getting all of them to there, plus you're getting a few more a little bit higher. Any other questions? So should we take this lady here?
How do you propose to develop the subject knowledge of all your staff to that depth?
Can I pass you over to these two for that? We've got Lisa and Claire. Subject knowledge, how do we ensure that teachers have that subject knowledge?
So I can talk a bit about...
This is Claire Christine, SLE.
So yeah, I work closely with these guys, and I work at Ashley Down, and also have the lovely joy of working with lots of teachers in lots of schools across Bristol. And definitely I would say that the biggest thing for me is development of teacher pedagogical subject knowledge, being at the heart of driving all progress in kind of teaching and learning. And that's definitely the heart of what we do, and most of the professional development I'm involved in kind of focus around that. So specific things that we've done in our school, we talk about a learning-led planning process. So I think traditionally the model of planning in maths is what we call an activity-led planning process, which basically says I'm teaching fractions. What can my lower retainers do? I'm looking at primary sources. What can my middle retainers? I saw that really cool game on converting improper fractions to mixed numbers when I was on that course. Maybe my higher retainers would enjoy that. And then you're planning, and then your lesson becomes about explaining the task so that the children can complete it. So the idea of learning-led is that you focus very, very clearly on what you want children to learn in a lesson, but specifically this lovely Chinese idea that's not been mentioned, I think, key difficulty point. So we know what key difficulty points are going to be. You can say to a reception teacher who's never taught decimals, okay, if we ask year 5s or year 4s to add 0.5 and 0.6, what do you think the common misconception is going to be? And I'll say, do they say 0.11? Yes, they do. So we know what those common misconceptions are, but traditionally we've been terribly bad as a profession at thinking, okay, well, they've done that wrong last year and the year before and the 5 years before that, so actually how am I going to teach it differently this year? So one thing that we do at the start of our kind of medium-term planning, so our 3-week block, is to say that you have to have your half-hour, 45-minute hour conversation with your year group partner without any planning formats open on the screen with people starting typing in day 1, what shall I do? And you talk about that. You say, what are the common misconceptions? What do they get wrong every year on this? How do we traditionally teach it, and how are we going to teach it differently this year so that they do it in a different way? And we provide kind of some medium-term planning support, but it's like Mike says, a travesty that with the new national curriculum there wasn't this stuff provided centrally. But there's brilliant articles on Enrich. You Google Enrich fractions article or Enrich money article. In 5 or 10 minutes you can get a brilliant bit of pedagogy on the effective teaching of fractions or effective teaching of money. So I would say that's one really simple step you can take. The other thing that Jane Jones, who's the lead maths HMI for Ofsted, says is she said, okay, one specific thing you can do, you've done your end of term assessments or end of unit assessment or whatever it is, and you get every teacher in the school to choose one thing which the children have done badly. You taught it, but they've not done well in the test. And then what you do is you have 15, 20 minutes dedicated time in the staff meeting when you say, what have I taught? How did I teach it? And how am I going to do it differently next time? Because our standard way of revisiting often is to open the same lesson smart board and to say it a bit louder and, point a bit more and maybe draw another couple of pictures that are basically the same as the one you had up there. So that's two really specific things you could do. The first half-hour, 45 minutes of year group planning time has to be no documents open, just talking about common misconceptions and how you present things differently. Yes, that after assessments, each teacher chooses one area. You think, why did they all go wrong? How did I teach it last time, and how am I now going to go back and teach it more effectively, and then evaluate on that. So there's 2 specific starters that you can get going with for developing subject knowledge.
And I'm Lisa Pollard, I'm another maths hub lead, and in general I'm a secondary, but I've been doing a lot of work with primary. I am from the Catalonia Federation, so I've been working with primaries in terms of them working on their own subject knowledge, not just your own personal content knowledge, but also your pedagogical content knowledge, a lot of it based around Schumann and some of the academic research that goes into that. And then we've taken that as well and looked at how that also works with secondaries. And subject knowledge enhancement was a big issue that came across nationally. So all of the hubs, all 34 of them across the country, have been working with subject knowledge enhancement courses, both at primary and at secondary. And these are led by PD leads, experienced teachers, outstanding practitioners, and they've been looking at both pedagogical content knowledge and your own content knowledge of the subject. So if, for example, you do want to work on extra things, you know that your subject knowledge isn't where it should be, contact your local hub, which is probably us, but also there are others around there. There are lots of people, Claire, myself and other teams who are doing this already. So it doesn't mean that you have to come and join in, but in terms of if you want to see some of the good practice happening, come along to one of the Federation nights where the subject knowledge enhancement is going on. Come along and see one of our groups, our class participants, and then see if we can widen that and get it into more areas.
And just to reiterate on some of the points that we've made, it's about changing how we work together. You know, Sal mentioned the teacher research group. Maybe if we look at one small strand and unpick as a large group and look at that subject knowledge and look at what's going wrong, what's going right, so you've got those small steps carefully mapped out as a school, I think that would be a great way forward. So you've got that ongoing dialogue about what works, what doesn't work.
And the other thing I think is it's a kind of completely, it's a one-off investment. So it's not like kind of, you're marking and assessing, you have to do it all again next year and you've done it brilliantly, you're starting from scratch. Once you've moved your thinking forward in how to teach a particular topic, that's done. And next year you've got that, and you can either look at something else or you can develop that further. So it's just, it really is a kind of lifetime investment that, just amazing how much you can really practice forward with half an hour, 45 minutes of deep reflection, and then it's done. You've got that forever.
Does anyone have any questions for Jean or Sherry? Yes.
Just one plug before then, if that's all right. If you wanted to get going on teacher research immediately, there is a flyer about an action research video club that I will be running starting in April, so that's where you sign in, there's a flyer. But my question is, in the UK national curriculum, the first statement is that mathematics is a creative and highly connected subject. And I would be interested to know in your planning where the creativity for students comes in the planning, or I could say that in different ways, but does that make sense as a question?
I'll try. 他说英国的他们数学的指导方针呢，所以要很重要的就是要启发孩子们的创造性，所以在课程设计的时候呢，要把这个纳入进去。那像你们在设计你们的课程的时候，你们是怎么样把这个创造性纳入到你们的课程设计里面呢？
OK， 在上海市的这个课程标准当中，就是非常注重就是学生的一个创造性，所以呢，其实也是要求就是数学教师能够在课程的设置当中，就是尽可能的让学生有机会去创造，或者是有自己的这个想法，或者是有自己的这个思考过程，所以我们在教学的当中就尽量去让学生多想、多思考。
The creativity in the guideline is equally important for planning. So when they try to plan their lessons, they try to encourage children to think to come up the process, the solution, encouraging them to come up to look at things in different angles, and encourage them to look at the new problems and then think how they can solve. That's how they try to encourage them to think for themselves.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions?
I was just wondering about, so we're sort of plumbed with pace of lessons and things like that. How do you maintain a consistent pace for all students at all times?
小朋友上课的时候呢，会有不同的速度，然后根据不同的小朋友的，你是怎么样去维持你上课的一个平稳的速度？
我说，我想在上海，我们相信每个孩子都能做到，不是这样相信。然后我们面向于大部分的学生，就是中等水平的学生的那个水平进行教学。如果发现有的学生低于这个水平，跟不上，我们会适当的放慢一些去关心他们。然后我发现有比这个水平更高的学生，我们会有一些比如 challenge 的题目啊，或者说我们会分 1 star、2 star 或 3 star， 像今天我跟你说的样，然后让鼓励不同的孩子去达到那个标准。但基本的限制在那里的是面向于大部分的孩子的，这是不变的。然后尽可能的兼顾下面的和上面的，这个跟英国是有很大的不同，因为你们是 group。然后我们是没有group，所以我们是这样来教学的。其实我们的目的都是为了尽可能帮助每个孩子进步，就是这样子。
So the way to conduct in Shanghai's lessons is they have a basic standard is there. They're probably aiming at the middle ground. So that is the pace of the teaching is aiming at that middle ground. But of course, according to children, if they found that some of the children are below the middle ground, they will try to slow down, but not too much. But if they find some of the children is above that, they will give out challenge questions in the lessons, but they won't speed up that much. So they're basically aiming at the middle ground.
这个和英国是同源
吧？就是刚才那个问题，我帮补充一下，就是除了刚才那个老师说的，就是我们有一个标准的一个，就要照顾大部分学生在那里。另外，我觉得我们那个这个题目的设计上面，不是也有很多的层次吗？就在我们的那个习题啊，还有例题的设计上，都是有难度、有梯度的，这样就可以照顾到所有的学生。你能达到哪一层，就让你。
你可以做其中的一部分，不要求你全部完成。如果有能力的话，可以做更好的，是这样。OK, please. Sorry.
要不要自己解释呢？
我不行的。
The questions they provided for the children, they have different layers of standards already. So when they design the questions to the children, there's embedded different layers, different difficulties to children already. So in that sense, every child in the same class, they would be able to answer certain levels of questions, but the fundamental line is that everybody has to achieve certain standard. That's the basic thing.
When somebody came to watch this week, they asked Jean, so if children don't pass the year, do they stay in the same year group? You know, so you have younger or older children in the same year group. She said they don't fail. They just don't fail. They all pass. So it's that idea about they can do, I think, is really important.
还有一点我想补充一下，就是其实我们在设计练习的时候，是非常注重就是联系的 ，make links。就是比如说有一道题目，比如说是一开始的时候是对于少数学生的，也可能只有少数学生能够得到，就是最 top 的那些学生。但是在第二次练习的时候，我们会把这一个练习进行一个辨识，然后辨识了以后就会有那么有更多的中层的学生能够知道，这道题目我曾经遇到过。这样的就是更多的学生呢能够掌握像这样的一个层次的练习，然后到第三次练习的时候呢，我们再会和他有一个层次的一个联系，这样呢就是让就是大部分的学生，那些甚至是在 bottom 的那些学生也能够看到，哇，我看到我这样的题目，我知道这样的一个类型，我知道了，以后我就会做了。这样进行一个层层的一个训练了以后，就使绝大多数的学生能够达到就是刚才所说的那种层次的练习。
就像今天主持人我们所说的那样，渐渐多渐他就会了，就这个意思。
So even with the challenge questions for the more advanced children, they were giving them the question, but giving out the exercise for the whole class to do it as well. But that is not going to be only one time. Once you do that, explain probably just only top students were able to understand for that one the first time. But they will do it again for the second time. And the second time, hoping will be more children, because at the second time they heard of they hear of these questions, and they were able to join in, they were able to understand. And that is not the end of it. They will give another probably variation of it, but the third times, giving out the same questions, originally designed for the top children, but the third time, there will be more children able to participate because they heard it before, it was in their mind. That's why Sherry was telling me today in the school, because even giving out a challenge question towards the end of each lesson, and it's probably just one or two each time, or one or two children understand that, but the rest of the children hear it, use it in their mind, and the second time, mention it again, they will hear the second time, that probably more children hear it, and eventually maybe some of the children just need more reminded, more repeated in variations, and sometimes they just click, they are able to do it as well.
So I'm going to wrap up. I'm a little bit conscious of time. Obviously, Jean and Sherry will be available outside, some of the awesome drinks and bits and pieces like that. So can we just say once again a really big thank you to Jane and to Sal and to Sherry and to Jean and to you, of course, for their hard work over the last few weeks. And let's give them a big round. Jean and Sherry sit down.
And Lisa and I have just got a little gift. We would like to say thank you so much. We feel so excited we have this opportunity for so many teachers in Bristol and the surrounding area to work with you. So thank you very much. So Sherry, this is for you. Thank you very much.
And I believe there isn't much space left in your suitcase. But hopefully there's room for that. So
yes, thank you.
Very much.
Randomly thought to pick up, and one Esther asked if there was any video available, and yeah, we should say that the lessons have been videoed using Iris Connect, and as soon as we've quickly figured out how to get the technology, we have now. So they will be available through the Hub website.
And Rian, who's the coordinator, has been sending you emails out madly, will then be able to give you a link just to write it for you.
And the second thing that I just thought randomly is that a few of you asked about challenge and extension through depth. And just to say that there is a set of kind of national exemplification materials of what mastery and mastery for greater depth looks like for a range of the kind of key objectives in the new national curriculum that will be published through the General Hub's website and through the NCTM sometime in May. I think May. So so that is coming and will be incredibly useful.
So if you want to pop out and have some drinks and nibbles, thanks very much for playing this evening.